To protect our family, I took the blame for my brother's mistake, until he let me face the fallout alone. My name is Evan, I'm 33 years old, and for most of my life, I've believed that family was something worth sacrificing for. That belief was stitched into me from the time I was a kid, not because anyone said it directly, but because my parents lived it. My father, Greg, worked himself sick in a factory job that paid just enough to keep food on the table. My mother, Claire, used to say that we might not have had much, but we had each other, and that was more valuable than anything money could buy. I held on to that idea like a moral compass. But as I would later find out, loyalty, real loyalty, can't be one-sided. I have one brother, Liam, who's 2 years younger than me. Growing up, he was always the charming one, the kind of person who could get away with things because he could make anyone laugh after screwing up. I was the quieter one, the one who took things too seriously, the one teachers called reliable, the one who parents trusted to babysit their kids. That balance between us worked for a long time, until it didn't. Because when you build your life being the dependable one, it's almost inevitable that someone will take advantage of that reliability when it matters most. Liam and I used to be close. We shared a room until I was 18, and when I left for college, I remember him hugging me at the bus station and saying he'd miss having me around. I believed him, even after he started going down paths that didn't fit the version of him I'd known, skipping classes, getting into fights, borrowing money from people he shouldn't. I still saw the kid who used to sneak into my bed after nightmares and tell me he couldn't sleep without hearing my breathing. I thought that meant something. When our dad died of a stroke 3 years ago, it shook both of us. But it hit Liam differently. He spiraled. He lost his job at the auto shop and started hanging around with guys who never had anything good to offer. I had my own struggles, trying to keep up with bills, taking care of mom, and figuring out my place in a world that suddenly felt hollow without dad's steady presence. But even then, I couldn't turn my back on Liam. It felt like betrayal to even consider it. I remember one night vividly, the kind of night that becomes a fixed point in your memory. It was early March, cold and wet, the kind of damp that creeps into your bones. I'd just gotten home from work when Liam showed up at my apartment. His eyes were wide, red from either crying or lack of sleep. He wouldn't look me in the eye when he said he needed help. He didn't say much else, just that something had gone wrong, and if he didn't figure it out, he was screwed. I didn't ask questions. I should have. That night set everything in motion. He told me he'd borrowed money, a lot of it, from one of his so-called friends to fix his car. But then he'd crashed that same car into a parked vehicle outside a bar. It wasn't just a fender bender either. The owner had filed a police report, there were witnesses, and the worst part, Liam had been drinking. He wasn't arrested that night, but the cops were looking for whoever matched his car description. He said he couldn't afford to get another strike. His license had already been suspended a year earlier, and this would ruin any chance he had left of rebuilding his life. I remember standing there in silence, the sound of rain against the window filling the space between us. Every rational part of me told me to let him face it himself. He'd made the choice, he'd taken the risk, and he needed to deal with the consequences. But then I thought about Mom, how she'd been through so much already, and how it would destroy her to see her youngest son in trouble again. I couldn't do that to her. I couldn't do that to us. So I made the worst decision of my life. I told Liam I'd take care of it. I went to the police station the next morning and told them that I'd been the one driving the car that night, that I'd lost control, panicked, and fled. I remember how heavy the air felt in that room, how my voice wavered as I recited the story I'd rehearsed in my head. They didn't arrest me on the spot. They just took my statement, told me I'd likely be charged with leaving the scene of an accident, and that I'd need to appear in court. When I walked out of that building, I told myself I'd done the right thing, that this was what brothers did for each other. That once it was over, Liam would fix his life, and this would all be behind us. He promised me that. He promised that he'd pay the fines, that he'd help with whatever community service came my way, that he'd make it right. I wanted to believe him. For a few weeks, it almost seemed like things might actually work out. Liam got a part-time job at a warehouse. He started coming home early, staying out of trouble, even helping Mom with groceries. I remember thinking maybe this was the wake-up call he needed. I held onto that small piece of hope like it was a lifeline. But it didn't last. By the time my court date came, Liam had disappeared again. His phone was off, his job said he hadn't shown up in days, and Mom hadn't heard from him either. I went to that hearing alone, facing a judge who looked at me like I was another careless man too old to be making stupid decisions. I paid the fine. I accepted the community service hours. I nodded when the judge lectured me about responsibility and integrity. The irony nearly choked me. The first day I showed up to pick trash along the highway, I thought about calling Liam, screaming at him for leaving me like that. But then I thought about Mom again. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what had really happened. She still thought I'd just made a mistake, that Liam had nothing to do with it. I kept it that way because the idea of breaking her heart felt worse than swallowing the lie. Weeks turned into months. I finished my service, paid every cent of the penalty, and tried to rebuild the small life I'd fractured in the process. But something in me had changed. I couldn't look in the mirror without seeing the fool I'd become, the dependable brother, the fixer, the one who'd always clean up the mess. And then, just when I thought I'd finally started to move past it, Liam came back. It was late summer by then, one of those muggy nights where even the air feels heavy with unspoken tension. He showed up at my apartment again, same as before, except this time he wasn't desperate. He was smiling, wearing new sneakers, clean clothes, even holding a takeaway coffee like he'd just come from a morning meeting. When I opened the door, my mind went blank. I didn't know if I wanted to punch him or hug him. He acted like nothing had happened. That night would change everything again. But this time it wouldn't be because of what I chose to do for him. It would be because of what he chose not to do for me. When Liam walked through my door that night, it felt like time folded in on itself. The last thing I remembered of him was the silence, unanswered calls, ignored messages, the hollow absence of a brother who'd promised to stand by me. Now here he was, laughing, brushing rain off his shoulders, saying something about how good it was to see me. It took every ounce of self-control not to slam the door in his face. He dropped himself onto my couch like it was his own. He started talking about the new job he'd landed, working for a guy who owned a few car lots in town. Apparently he was doing well, even saving up for something big. He kept saying things were finally turning around. I just stood there, watching him, unable to reconcile this version of Liam with the one who'd vanished while I was knee-deep in court papers and roadside trash. After a few minutes, I asked where he'd been. He gave some half-answer about needing space to figure things out. Said he didn't want to burden me anymore. That word, burden, hit like a punch. I wanted to tell him that disappearing, while I took the blame for his crime, wasn't just running from responsibility, it was running from me. But I couldn't find the words. They stuck somewhere in my throat, too heavy to push out. He looked around my apartment, nodding as if he was inspecting his own handiwork. Then he asked if I still had Mom over every Sunday for dinner. I said I did. He smiled and said maybe he'd stop by next week, that it had been too long. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, or maybe I just wanted to. When he finally left, I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the door long after it closed. A part of me hoped that his reappearance meant maybe, somehow, things would start to heal. Another part of me, the quieter, more honest one, knew that some wounds don't close just because the person who caused them walks back into the room. For a few weeks, Liam made an effort. He called Mom, helped her fix things around the house, even brought over groceries once. She was thrilled. She said she hadn't seen him look so stable in years. Watching her smile like that almost made the bitterness in my chest worth it. Almost. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something again. He had this habit of deflecting questions, changing the subject whenever I asked about his job or who he was spending time with. I told myself I wouldn't get involved. I'd done enough. I'd learned my lesson the hard way. That resolve lasted about 2 months. It started with a call from Mom. Her voice trembled in that way that instantly made my stomach twist. She said 2 men had come by her house that afternoon asking for Liam. They weren't friendly. She said one of them had a tattoo of a snake on his neck, and they'd asked when Liam would be back, but didn't say why. I left work immediately. When I got to her place, she was sitting on the couch, clutching a mug of tea, hands shaking. I tried to keep my voice calm as I told her not to worry, that I'd find out what was going on. But the truth was, my heart was pounding. I knew the pattern. I'd seen it too many times before. Liam didn't just attract trouble, he invited it. It took me 2 days to track him down. I finally found him at a local bar, laughing with a few guys I didn't recognize. When I asked to talk to him outside, he rolled his eyes like I was being dramatic. He said I was overreacting, that those men were just some guys he owed a little money to. The same words I'd heard too many times before. I felt anger bubbling up, but beneath it was something worse, exhaustion. I told him he needed to come clean to Mom before things got worse. He brushed me off, saying he had everything under control. I wanted to believe him. I really did. A week later, I realized how wrong I was. One evening, I came home from work and saw 2 police cruisers parked near my building. My first thought was that they were there for someone else. But when I walked up the stairs and saw an officer waiting by my door, I knew. They said there'd been an altercation involving my car. Apparently, someone matching Liam's description had used it earlier that day. It was caught on a traffic camera near a gas station robbery, my car, the one I'd parked in my assigned spot that morning. They asked if I knew where Liam was. I told them I didn't, and that I hadn't given him permission to use my vehicle. They asked a few more questions, then left after taking a statement. I spent that night pacing the apartment, trying to decide if I should call him or drive straight to Mom's. He wasn't answering his phone, which only made the dread grow heavier. Around midnight, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, there he was. He looked frantic, sweat on his forehead, dirt on his jacket, eyes darting around like he expected someone to be behind him. I didn't even ask what he'd done this time. He didn't have to say it. The guilt was written all over him. He said he'd only borrowed my car for a few hours. That he'd gone with some guys to help them pick something up. He didn't know they planned to rob the place, or at least that's what he claimed. But when the cops started chasing them, they ditched the car and ran, and now once again he needed help. In that moment it felt like déjà vu, the same pleading eyes, the same promises, the same quiet voice in my head whispering that if I didn't do something Mom would lose another son. I stood there frozen between anger and duty, between the man I wanted to be and the one I'd already been. He said the police would probably connect everything back to me because the car was registered under my name. He needed a place to lay low, just for a few days. I remember staring at him, at the brother I'd once trusted with everything, and feeling something inside me crack. I let him in, not because I forgave him, but because some habits are hard to break, especially the ones that come disguised as love. He slept on my couch that night while I sat awake at the kitchen table, the clock ticking louder with every passing hour. By morning, I'd already made up my mind. I couldn't take the blame again, not this time. But by the time I got out of the shower and walked into the living room, he was gone. So was my wallet, and the next knock on my door wasn't Liam coming back. It was the police. The sound of that knock still echoes in my head sometimes. It wasn't just the police knocking. It was the sound of my last bit of peace falling apart. When I opened the door, 2 officers stood there. They weren't aggressive, not yet, but there was that professional stillness in their eyes that told me they weren't there for casual questions. One of them asked if I was Evan Brooks. I nodded, and he told me they needed to ask a few follow-up questions about the vehicle linked to the gas station robbery earlier that week. I tried to stay calm, though my pulse was hammering so hard I could feel it in my neck. I told them I hadn't been near the gas station, that my car had been taken without my consent. They asked if I had filed a theft report. I hadn't, and when I tried to explain that it was my brother who'd taken it, I could already see where their minds were going. It didn't sound believable. To them, it looked like I was trying to cover for someone, or worse, that I was part of it. They asked if I knew where Liam was. I said I didn't. That part, at least, was true. I hadn't seen him since he'd stolen from me again. But truth didn't seem to matter much. They said they'd need to bring me in for further questioning. I didn't resist. I'd been through this before. Different details, same humiliation. The station was cold, and the fluorescent lights made everyone look guilty. I sat in that small gray room, answering the same questions over and over. What time did I last see him? Why didn't I report the car stolen sooner? Did I have any reason to believe he'd commit a robbery? Each question felt like a small cut, reopening wounds I thought had healed. I kept my voice steady, explaining that my brother had a history of bad decisions, that I'd tried to help him, that I had no involvement in whatever he'd done this time. They released me later that evening, but not before letting me know the car had been found abandoned on the edge of town with stolen cash scattered in the back seat. My car, my name, my problem. When I finally got home, the apartment felt smaller, heavier. The couch where he'd slept still had an imprint, a reminder that I'd let him in one last time. I sat there for hours, not even moving when the sun went down. I kept thinking about how I'd promised myself not to make the same mistake again, and somehow I'd done exactly that. Mom called the next morning. She sounded worried, said Liam hadn't come home, and that she'd heard about the robbery on the news. She asked if I thought he might be involved. I couldn't bring myself to lie. I told her yes. There was a pause on the line that lasted so long I thought she might have hung up. Then she said something that broke me more than anything else. She said, "He's still your brother even." I wanted to scream. Not because she was wrong, but because she was right in a way that hurt too much. He was still my brother. The same one who used my loyalty like currency. The same one who disappeared when things got hard and came crawling back when he needed saving. A few days later, detectives came by again. This time they had an arrest warrant for Liam. They asked if I'd contact them if he reached out. I said yes, though part of me doubted he ever would. Then, about a week later, he did. It was around midnight when my phone buzzed. I recognized the number immediately, even though I hadn't saved it. The message was short. He said he was sorry. Said he hadn't meant for things to get this bad, that he just needed a few more days to figure things out. I didn't reply. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to save him. I let the silence sit there. The next morning, I drove to Mom's house. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee in front of her, her eyes tired in a way that no amount of sleep could fix. She asked if I'd heard from Liam. I said yes. She asked if I knew where he was. I shook my head. We sat there for a long time without saying much. Then she said something that's stuck with me ever since. She said, "You've always been the one to carry the blame so no one else had to. But sometimes carrying someone else's sin only teaches them how to hand you another one." She wasn't accusing me. Her voice was soft, like she'd finally realized the weight she'd let me carry all these years. I think she saw how much it had taken from me. 2 nights later, the police caught Liam. He'd been hiding in a motel 2 towns over. The next morning, an officer called me to confirm they had him in custody. I didn't feel relief, not exactly. Just a kind of hollow acceptance, like I'd known this ending was coming all along. Mom wanted to visit him, but she couldn't bring herself to go alone, so she asked me to come with her. I didn't want to, but she looked so fragile when she asked that I agreed. We drove to the county jail together, the silence between us so thick it felt like another passenger. When we finally saw him, he looked small. His hair was longer, his face thinner, but it was his eyes that got me. They weren't scared or ashamed, they were familiar. The same eyes that used to ask me to cover for him when we were kids. The same eyes that knew how to twist my heart into forgiveness. He told Mom it wasn't as bad as it looked, that he'd get out soon, that he just needed her to call a lawyer. She nodded, tears running down her face. When he turned to me, waiting for me to say something, I just stared at him. For the first time, I didn't see my brother. I saw a man who'd taken everything I'd ever given him and turned it into an excuse. When we left, Mom was quiet. Halfway home, she said she felt like she'd lost both her sons. I didn't correct her, because in a way she had. That night, I packed a small bag and drove out to the lake we used to visit as kids. I sat on the hood of my car, staring at the reflection of the moon in the water, and thought about how loyalty, when one-sided, isn't noble. It's a slow kind of self-erasure. For years I thought protecting Liam was the right thing, that taking his blame was love, that it made me a good brother, a good son. But sitting there under that cold sky, I realized something that changed everything. Love without boundaries isn't love at all, it's surrender. And I was done surrendering. After that night at the lake, something shifted inside me. For the first time in years, I stopped thinking about Liam as someone I needed to save. I stopped imagining ways to fix his mistakes or cover for his recklessness. Instead, I started thinking about myself, about what it meant to live without carrying the burden of someone else's choices, even if that someone was your own brother. Mom called the next morning. She'd been crying again, the sound of her voice almost shattering my resolve, but I stayed firm. I told her I needed time, not from her, not from anyone else, but from Liam. She asked if I was going to visit him in jail. I said no. I didn't explain why. I couldn't. The truth was simple. I couldn't face him without remembering all the nights I had stayed awake, covering for his mistakes, sacrificing my own peace, only to have him vanish when I needed him most. Over the next few weeks, I slowly started reclaiming my life. I returned to work with a focus I hadn't felt in years. Tasks I used to put off because I was preoccupied with Liam became priorities again. I stopped letting phone calls and texts from him and his friends consume my evenings. I picked up running again, something I had abandoned when life felt too heavy, and every morning I would jog past streets and corners where memories of covering for him used to haunt me. Mom visited me one weekend, bringing a small basket of cookies. She apologized for everything she hadn't been able to prevent, for letting Liam lean on me too heavily, and for the times she'd unknowingly reinforced the pattern by praising my loyalty instead of setting boundaries. I hugged her, realizing that love sometimes means saying no, even to the people you care about most. That weekend, we went for a walk through the park near her house, talking about Dad, about old memories, about our own futures. It felt peaceful for the first time in a long time. Meanwhile, news came through that Liam had been sentenced for the robbery attempt. It wasn't a long sentence, just enough to put him back on the right track, according to the judge. I didn't feel relief. I felt numb. My sense of justice had little to do with the legal outcome. It had everything to do with knowing that the person I'd once risked so much for was finally facing the consequences himself. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't want to. Months passed, and I began to rebuild the life that had been overshadowed by Liam's decisions. I finally allowed myself to focus on ambitions I had shelved because I was too busy cleaning up after my brother. I took a promotion at work that required me to move into a bigger office, with more responsibilities and finally more autonomy. I started dating again, carefully, because I had been so emotionally entangled in family crises that I had neglected the other parts of my life. It was strange, liberating, and frightening all at once. One evening, I ran into a former friend from college, someone who had always reminded me that I deserved to be treated with respect and care, not as a shadow for someone else's mistakes. We went for coffee, and as we talked, I realized how much I had starved myself for years, emotionally, mentally, socially, trying to protect Liam. That awareness was painful, but also freeing. I began to understand that protecting my own life wasn't selfish. It was necessary. Mom called again one Saturday. She said she had visited Liam in jail and that he asked about me. She didn't tell me what he said exactly, and I didn't ask. That silence was intentional. I had learned that some conversations, some reconciliations aren't for you to initiate. They happen when both parties are ready, and right now, I wasn't ready. Not emotionally, not mentally, not spiritually. I didn't need closure from him. I needed closure for myself. I started volunteering at a local youth center, helping teenagers who were at risk of making the kinds of choices Liam had made. It was therapeutic. Seeing the mistakes they made and guiding them away from the same paths I had been forced to navigate gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't known I was missing. Each success story, a kid finishing high school, finding a job, avoiding trouble, felt like a small act of justice for all the times I'd been left to pay for someone else's errors. By the next spring, I had a routine that felt healthy. Work, exercise, social life, volunteering, family dinners with Mom. Liam was still in prison, and I didn't know if or when he would reach out again. And for the first time in my life, that uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like freedom. I wasn't responsible for his choices anymore, and I didn't have to carry guilt for what he did. One night, as I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee, looking out at the city lights, I thought about all the times I had sacrificed myself for Liam. I thought about the nights I stayed awake, the money I lent, the hours I spent trying to shield him. And for the first time, I felt proud, not for protecting him, but for protecting myself. I realized that family loyalty doesn't always go both ways. Sometimes it's blind, sometimes it's taken advantage of, and sometimes the only person you can truly be loyal to is yourself. I still love my brother. I always will. But love doesn't mean letting someone destroy your life while they continue theirs uninterrupted. Love means boundaries, consequences, and sometimes walking away. That's what I did. That's what I needed to do. And as I sipped my coffee, feeling the cool night air on my face, I finally understood that letting go wasn't giving up. It was choosing life. For the first time in years, I felt alive.